Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is part two of two for the chapter on the cardiovascular system that focus on the heart and blood vessels. At this point, we are going to take a look at the electrocardiogram. What is an electrocardiogram? An electrocardiogram is basically a recording of the electrical changes that occur in the myocardium during the cardiac cycle. Now, remember that you have a pacemaker. That pacemaker, the sinoatrial node, it's where the electric impulse is going to generate. It is going to be generated from. That electric impulse that generates from there is going to travel through the myocardium, reach the atrioventricular node, and from there, that impulse is going to travel through the remainder of the myocardium and specifically through the ventricles. So we are going to have a number of recordings. We're going to have contraction of the atria due to electric impulse and contraction of the ventricles because of the electric impulse. The question is, what is the quality of these different contractions? Now, obviously, because atria are smaller than ventricles, overall, the recording you are going to see is going to see the activity of the ventricles, both contraction and relaxation of the ventricles, just because of the intensity, right? So we have a little pen that is going to actually draw some lines based on the recording. Now, having that recording is going to give us a good idea as to the health of the myocardium. Is the myocardium behaving well? Is it kind of stiff and has a hard time contracting and take a long time to relax? What is the situation? So we can know and do further analysis and see if someone is at risk for heart failure, right? We are going to address the cardiovascular diseases. So there are a number of items that are very important to consider when looking at an electrocardiogram. We have the P wave. The P wave is recorded when the electric impulse is sent to the sinoatrial node. That P wave is followed by a complex that is called the QRS complex. That QRS complex tells us the intensity with which the ventricles are contracting, both left and right, obviously. And after that, the heart is going to recover. The recovery is also recorded as T wave. That T wave, it's a relaxation of the ventricles. And again, looking at the recording, we can tell if a patient is healthy in terms of the muscle tissue, the cardiac muscle tissue, or not. So typically, this is the recording we are going to have. So we have the P wave, again, that stimulates the sinoatrial node. And then we're going to have a triggering of the QRX complex, so QRS. And you see that there is a sharp increase and a sharp decrease. And we see actually a very narrow line here that shows you the quality of the recording in a healthy person. And then we have a relaxation wave here that is the T wave. Now, typically for a healthy person, the QRS complex has to be very sharp. Now, in a person who is otherwise maybe not in good health because the heart is kind of stiff because of fibrillation of the heart, you can see something like this. So you have a wider space between the line. That tells you that the heart is taking a while to contract and is also taking a while to come back to recovery mode, right? That is a problem that can maybe explain that, okay, well, someone is having some heart issue and maybe is at risk of heart failure. All right, so that's the electrocardiogram. Now, how about blood pressure? Blood pressure can be recorded using a little device that we call the sphygmomanometer. That sphygmomanometer is going to be applied on a cuff and actually provide a pressure, and that pressure is going to close some blood vessels in the forearm. And basically, the pressure that we are going to record is the flow of the blood through and rubbing against the walls of the blood vessel. So typically, in the past, we used the change in the level of mercury to tell the pressure, so that we measure the pressure in millimeter mercury. Hg is the atomic symbol for the element mercury. So how much of mercury is moving in millimeter to say actually what the pressure is. So this is basically to put you in terms of historical context. Now, we don't use mercury anymore these days because of environmental risks and health risks, right? Now we are using digital devices to measure blood pressure. In any case, whenever we measure blood pressure, we are taking two measures. One is the systolic pressure. The systolic pressure is the highest pressure that is recorded when the heart is pushing the blood from the left atrium, from the left ventricle to the body, right? So it goes through the aorta and then through the blood vessels, right? So that's the systolic pressure. That's the highest pressure. That's the top number that you see, right? Then you're going to have another number that is recorded that is called the diastolic pressure. The diastolic pressure, or the lowest pressure, occurs when the ventricles are recovering, right? When the ventricles are recovering. Now, for an adult, on average, a systolic pressure over diastolic pressure is going to be around 120 over 80. That's the average. Now, obviously, this is going to vary from one person to another, right? But that is a good number to know and to remember, so you know when you go to see a physician if you are within the norm or not. And let me remind you that the blood pressure is controlled by arterioles. We talked about that earlier in the previous video. Now, so specifically, you're going to have a sphygmomanometer, which is this whole device here, okay, with this structure that goes against the forearm, right? That is going to wrap the forearm, and the pump right here is going to be pumped so that the artery is going to be closed, right? We have the artery here that is closed. At that point, blood is not going through. Now, the nurse or the physician will start releasing a little knob here so that, the pressure on the forearm is released so that this blood vessel will start opening. And then as it opens, the blood that was blocked will now start going through, right? So the artery was closed. Now the artery is going to open, right? But it opens progressively, right? The first sound you hear is the systolic sound as the artery opens. That systolic sound is going to sound around 120, right, of pressure. And then you keep releasing the little device here. You keep releasing the little knob until there is no sound. Question: at what time did the sound go completely off? At that time, this is when you record the second pressure or the diastolic pressure that comes around 80, right? So basically, that's how we measure blood pressure. Now, knowing how to measure blood pressure, we are going to dive into some health aspect of blood pressure, right? You have some conditions that can trigger either high blood pressure or low blood pressure. The normal blood pressure being for the systolic pressure around 120 and the diastolic pressure around 80. Anything below that is considered hypotension, right? Less than 95 for systolic pressure, it's hypotension. Less than 50, it's hypotension. So less than 95 over 50, it's hypotension. Now, anything above 120 and 80 is considered hypertension. But really, there are different stages, right? We have pre-hypertension, which is when the systolic pressure falls between 120 and 139, while the diastolic pressure falls between 80 and 89. At that point, you don't really need to do anything specific to get back in shape. You just have to pay more attention on your diet, and you can work it out and bring everything back to normal. In stage 1 hypertension, this is when you really need to seriously start paying attention, okay? 140 to 159 for the systolic pressure, 90 to 99 for the diastolic pressure. At this point, really, you have to start considering taking some treatment for your hypertension. In stage 2 of hypertension, this is when you have your systolic pressure that is 160 or more, and the diastolic pressure is 100 or more. That definitely, it's not good. You have to see a physician and have to undergo a treatment. How about hypertensive crisis? This is really an emergency situation, right? An emergency situation when your systolic pressure is above 180, your diastolic pressure is above 110. These are conditions that can cause someone to fall dead, just right like that, right? So it is a condition that is absolutely that if anyone has to avoid to be in, because it's fatal, can lead to death. Now, what is important about blood flow? So the blood is going to flow under the highest pressure in arteries, right? And remember that arteries are thick because they have a thick layer of smooth muscle, right? while in the capillaries, the blood pressure is going to drop. Remember that the capillaries are organized in a capillary bed. And that capillary bed increases the surface area, right? For exchange, right? Exchange of gas, nutrients, waste. For that to happen, everything has to slow down. So you're going from high pressure to low pressure to low velocity so that exchange of material can happen, right? We are in the capillaries here, okay? So this is very important that that pressure be low, right? The flow be slow, so that exchange can occur. Without that, no good quality of exchange is going to happen. The tissues are not going to take the time to get the nutrients they need to thrive, right? The blood pressure is going to be minimal in the veins and in the venous, while the blood pressure is going to be minimal there, but the flow is going to increase. Why is that? This is because the blood has to rush to go back to the heart, so that from the right side of the heart, that blood is sent in the lungs to be loaded with oxygen and get rid of carbon dioxide and go back in the body, right? So basically, that's how the flow works. So here we have a graphic representation of everything I just explained with the arteries, right? Here, where the pressure is very high, so you can see the pressure is high, and as we go from arteries to arterioles, the pressure drops, right? And the pressure is actually the lowest when we go in the capillaries, venules, and veins. So that's for blood pressure, right? How about velocity, or the speed at which the blood is flowing? Well, we see that velocity actually is high here in the arteries, drops down in the arterioles, and then falls completely in the capillaries, which means that the blood is taking time in the capillaries for exchange to happen, right? And basically now then the velocity will start increasing back as we go from venules to veins, right? Now, one can wonder, okay, well, that velocity, what causes that velocity to increase as we go from venules to vein? Well, your muscles, your skeletal muscles are going to play a very important role in that. Your breathing is going to play a very important role in that. And again, remember that that velocity is important, that it increases because the blood has to go back to the heart and be released. Okay? Go back to the heart and be sent somewhere else. So then, what else do I need to explain here? The total cross-sectional area of the vessel. Notice that the cross-sectional area of the vessel is the highest in the capillary bed. This is so because you see that here in the capillary bed, we have a large surface area. This allows for the blood pressure to fall down, 1. 2, it allows for velocity to drop down, so exchange of material can happen, right? So this is what you want to remember about this. Now, the blood has to go back to the heart. So The blood pressure, again, in the veins and venule is so low, that the blood has to go back to the heart using some other devices, including the skeletal muscles that are actually going to contract. So this skeletal muscle and this skeletal muscle, they're going to contract, they're going to squeeze, which actually pushes the blood to go upward. Notice that the large blood vessels are going to have some valves, right? And the valves are there to prevent a backflow, right? So the muscles contract, the blood is not going to go back this way because of these valves here. So that locks, that prevents the blood from going backward. And here, the valve opens here so that the blood can go up, okay? And as the skeletal muscles are contracting, they will keep push up and up and up, right? So we have contraction here, relaxation. And you see when there is a relaxation, the blood tends to come back down, but there is no way because the valve here is closing to prevent that backflow. Okay, so you have the role of the skeletal muscles in moving the blood against gravity. Also, breathing, it's another mechanism that gets involved in bringing back the blood to the heart. Very specifically, you have the movement of the diaphragm that is going to bring that blood up. And finally, we have the valves that prevents a backflow so that the blood is going to go compartment after compartment and after compartment, right? Until it reaches the heart. Now, let's address the different types of cardiovascular pathways. There are two major pathways. You have the pulmonary pathway and the systemic pathway. In the pulmonary pathway, basically, you have that the blood goes from the heart to the lungs. That's the pulmonary circuit. From the heart to the lungs. Specifically, what is happening there? From the right part of the heart, right? The right atrium is receiving blood that is poor with oxygen, rich with carbon dioxide. It's dark blue, right? It's dark red, I'm sorry. Therefore, it's represented blue. Then that blood is going to flow in the right ventricle. And from the right ventricle, the blood is going to be sent to the lungs, where carbon dioxide is going to be released. So carbon dioxide goes out, oxygen comes in. And once oxygen comes in, now we do have the blood that goes from dark red to bright red. We are here. And now that blood is going to go from the lungs to the heart, to the left atrium, right? And from the left atrium to the left ventricle, right? And then we go to the systemic circuit. In the systemic circuit, you have the blood that is going to leave the left ventricle, be pumped in the body, here and here, the upper part of the body and the lower part of the body. There, the head, the arms, all the tissues in our body are going to receive that blood that is loaded with oxygen, right? And so there, oxygen is going to be distributed to organs, okay? And that oxygen is going to be replaced. So as oxygen goes out of the blood, carbon dioxide comes in, right? And when that happens, then the blood is going to now leave the system and go back toward the heart, right? With loaded with carbon dioxide and poor with oxygen. That's why this part right here is blue, right? Because the blood is dark red because of a lot of carbon dioxide. This part right here is rich with oxygen, bright red. Okay, so we have two types of circuits, the pulmonary circuit and the systemic circuit. Please review that. I'm going to bug you with that. All right, so this slide actually shows you all the major arteries and veins in the body. Now, here is what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to ask you to memorize these different veins and arteries. I'm not going to do that, right? But for those of you who are considering nursing, this is a good starting point to becoming familiar, to familiarize yourself with all this terminology. So go through this list. And again, I'm not going to test you on that. It's only for your information. Now, so the heart itself as an organ needs to be nourished, right? It needs to be nourished. Question is, what nourishes the heart as an organ? The myocardium, what nourishes it? This is when we go to the coronary circulation. The coronary circulation, it's all the blood vessels that go through the heart as an organ, right? These blood vessels are going to bring nutrients to the heart, the myocardium. They're going to take away waste. We are going to have the coronary arteries and the coronary veins, right? And these coronary arteries are going to branch off directly from the base of the heart where the aorta is exiting the heart, right? And which shows you that to fuel the heart with nutrients and waste, the system that feeds the heart is separate from the systemic and the pulmonary pathway. They are completely separated, okay? So they are separate from the systemic and pulmonary pathway or circuit. Now, the hepatic portal system is the system by which once we have digested our food and we have production of nutrients, that these nutrients are going to be absorbed from the small intestine in the blood. Now, as the nutrients are absorbed, and when we talk about nutrients, we are talking about amino acids, we're talking about glucose, we're talking about all the nutrients that are going to be the source of food for your tissues. Before these nutrients go in circulation, the first stop is the liver. Now, let me show you here. So you see we have the digestive system, the place where absorption of nutrients is happening right here in the small intestine. And before going anywhere else in the body, the blood has to transit first of all through the liver. And there is going to be an assessment. Is there too much nutrients in circulation in the blood? The answer is yes or no. If the answer is yes, then the liver is going to say, okay, let me store that nutrient so that when the blood exits and goes through the remainder of the body, we don't have too much glucose in the blood, in which case we can be in a situation that we call diabetes, right? We don't be in a situation where there is too much amino acids compared to what the body really needs in terms of concentration in the blood, too much too much nucleotide, right? And so on and so forth. Okay? So that's the rationale. Okay? So the liver is going to synthesize blood proteins and store glucose as glycogen, right? Glycogen, it's basically the form under which glucose is stored in animals, in the animal body, including human, right? So the liver is also going to play a very important role in purifying the blood from the products that come from the digestive tract, because everything that is absorbed in the digestive tract is not necessarily good for the body. Okay? The liver is going to make an assessment, is going to say, okay, well, we need to clean that blood, all right, and get rid of not good stuff, right? Remember that the liver plays a very important role in detoxification, right? When you are taking drugs, and say you are undergoing a treatment, right? The drugs is going to necessarily end up in the blood. And the liver is one of these organs that is doing detoxification, right? Let me close that parenthesis. And after going through the liver, the blood is now going to be released so that it can go back to the heart, where that blood is going to be pumped throughout the body for organs and tissues to receive nutrients and get rid of waste. All right, so let's focus at the capillary bed and the exchange that is happening in the capillary bed. Remember, the blood pressure has to drop in the capillary bed. That's one. Two, the velocity has to drop as well so that there is time for exchange. In addition to that, there is another thing that we need to mention. It's that you have the blood pressure in the arterial end that is always going to be higher than the osmotic pressure on the arterial end. Let me repeat that. The blood pressure in the arterial end is higher than the osmotic pressure in that area, so that this is going to have as consequence that the blood that contains bunch of chemicals, including nutrients, the nutrients are going to filter through the endothelium to move toward the tissues. So the nutrients such as glucose is going to move toward the tissues, amino acids toward the tissue, oxygen, water, while so that's what is going to happen. Then when you go on the venule end, we are going to have the opposite that is going to happen. So the osmotic pressure there is going to be higher than the blood pressure. What this causes is that anything that is waste is going to filter in to the blood, into the blood vessel, right? So water in this end is going to come in, right? Waste is going to come in. Carbon dioxide is going to all come in. By the way, carbon dioxide is a waste, right? So this is how we are going to see some exchange of material in the capillary bed, very much based on the osmotic pressure and the blood pressure. On the arterial end, osmotic pressure is low, blood pressure is high, which allows nutrients to come in. while on the venule end, osmotic pressure is high, blood pressure is low, which allow waste to come in at the venule end. All right? Very important to remember. So now, we say that actually, I don't remember if I mentioned that, but know that at the capillary bed level, there is not only the capillary bed, you also have the lymphatic vessels that also form capillaries. These lymphatic vessels that are going to be divided into small capillaries are going to be the location where the blood is going to exchange fluid with the lymph, so that some excess fluid in the blood is going to go in the lymphatic vessels as lymph, and also when there is little volume in the blood, the needed fluid is going to leave the lymphatic vessels as lymph to go in the blood and become plasma. But that's another story. We are going to address that later. So the lymphatic capillaries are going to constitute a bed that is going to align alongside with the capillary bed. That's a very important piece to remember. The lymphatic capillaries are going to take up the excess body fluid. And at that point, that body fluid that at one time was called plasma in the blood is now called lymph. Okay? Eventually, the lymph is going to return to the cardiovascular system as plasma in the veins, specifically in the chest, right? Now, the precapillary sphincters can shut down that because of trying to jugulate the blood pressure, right, in the body. So here we have the capillary bed for the blood vessels and the lymphatic capillaries where exchange of fluid is happening. And if you follow the arrows, you are going to see how the fluid leaves the capillary to go in the lymph. In the lymphatic capillaries here. So that's how it goes, right? And then it moves here, and the fluid that now we call the lymph goes now from the lymphatic capillaries to the lymphatic ducts and take it to larger pipes. So now we are diving into the cardiovascular diseases. Cardiovascular diseases are also called the silent killers. There are so many different kinds of cardiovascular diseases, right? This is the leading cause of death in many industrialized countries, right, including the United States. So what are these diseases? For instance, hypertension. You can have hypertension. You can have hypertension without you knowing that you have hypertension, right? You can have atherosclerosis without you knowing that you have atherosclerosis, right? And this is the reason why these diseases are called silent killers, because they can kill you without any kind of warning. When you have a stroke, heart attack, aneurysm, all these diseases can happen without any form of warning, right? Which means that we have to really watch our health, especially when we get 40 and above, right? For these diseases. Now, hypertension, what is this? Hypertension, we already talked about blood pressure and high blood pressure, so we defined it, right? So this is basically when the blood pressure is very high. So 140 for the systolic pressure, 90 for the diastolic pressure, right? This is considered hypertension, okay? And this can lead to heart attacks, strokes, or kidney failures. Hypertension, this is bad news. So it's very important to start watching our lifestyle as we get older. Atherosclerosis. This is a condition in which plaques are going to form in our blood vessels, where we have plaques of fat tissue that cause narrowing of our blood vessels. Now, these plaques are basically called thrombus when they are stationary. But when they break and move away from the location where they were, they go in circulation and go in other places, go cause some issues there. This is an embolus, right? This is an embolus, so that there are conditions that we call thromboembolism. 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 This is when a thrombus becomes an embolus and causes some issues, including stroke, heart attack, and aneurysm. Now, this is an example of, fat tissue that is stored, and you can see how the opening is now distorted. So there is loss in the diameter of the opening, which is going to necessarily cause high blood pressure, right? If you narrow a tube, the pressure is going to necessarily go high in that tube, right? So we have here a cross section of a blood vessel with some plaques. Now, how about strokes? Strokes are also known as cerebrovascular accident, or CVA, cerebrovascular accident. This often happen in the brain, right? When we have a cranial artery that is blocked or burst, right? That blockage or bursting is going to cause the brain to undergo a certain time without oxygen. And that lack of oxygen is going to cause some nerve cells to die. And when this nerve cell die because of lack of oxygen, we start losing the use of some of our organs, including, for instance, a side of the face, the lips, the eye. The eyelid is not closing, just because the muscles that are supposed to innervate this, the nerve cells that are supposed to innervate these muscles are damaged, right? So what are some symptoms of stroke? Symptoms include numbness of hand or face, difficulty speaking, and inability to see with one particular eye. How about heart attack? Heart attack is when the heart as an organ is affected. That heart can be affected by stiffening with fibers forming in the heart. And that's why sometimes we need to use a defibrillator, right, to break apart the fibers, okay? So heart attack is also known as myocardial infarctus, that myocardial infarctus is basically heart failure. Okay, this is when there is lack of oxygen in our tissue, in our myocardium, so that there is no energy for the myocardium to contract. Right? You need oxygen to produce ATP, and ATP is needed to cause contraction. Right? Heart attack can sometimes start with angina pectoris, which is a condition in which you have a pain that radiates down along your left arm due to the blockage of the coronary artery, right? Next is aneurysm. Aneurysm is basically a ballooning of a blood vessel, right? This can be caused by atherosclerosis or hypertension, but bottom line, it's that this is going to cause atherosclerosis, and hypertension can cause a weakening of the walls of the blood vessel, so that that blood vessel will balloon. Okay, and this is going to typically happen in abdominal arteries and also arteries leading to the brain. So we talked about this different cardiovascular diseases, but how can we treat these cardiovascular diseases? Now, our lifestyles plays a very important role, as you already know. But when we cannot act on our lifestyle, or when the disease is declared, then what? There are different approaches we can use, including the use of drugs that are going to, in the case of atherosclerosis, for instance, dissolve the plaques, okay, or dissolve the blood clots. Now, there is a particular chemical, which is actually an enzyme. It's called TPA, okay? TPA, it's basically a drug that dissolves clots, right? Other treatment are going to be the bypass surgeries. Bypass surgeries typically are going to happen to avoid a blockage, right? So using surgery, we're going to bypass the area that is blocked so that the blood can circulate again through the organ. Another treatment beside bypass surgery is a stent. A stent, it's a mesh-like structure. Okay, it's a mesh. It's a wired mesh. I'm sorry. It's a wired mesh cylinder that force a clogged artery or a clogged vein to stay open, right? So that stent actually forces the pipe open. And then we have angioplasty. Angioplasty, it's basically a tube with a balloon that is inserted in a blood vessel that is clogged, right? This allows for circulation of the blood in the blood vessel. The most common treatments, though, are actually combination of stent and angioplasty. That combination of stent and angioplasty actually allows a better way to actually tackle atherosclerosis. So here you have bypass surgery. Here you have a coronary blood vessel here that is blocked right here, and another one that is blocked right here. So we have a second bypass here, and another one that is blocked here. So we have a third bypass here. Okay, so we have a triple bypass surgery in this case here. Here we have a stent, and you can see the mesh, like the mesh structure, all right, that keeps this blood vessel open, right? So these are some treatments for atherosclerosis. And all the treatments are going to be the use of pumps, okay? So for instance, when there is heart failure, there is no more ability to pump, right? So we can use a pump that is going to assist our body in pumping the blood. So we have the left ventricle assisted device, LVAD. We have heart transplants. That heart transplant can be either natural or artificial. This is a very commonly done these days. Okay, so we have a heart replacement here. Okay, we have the device here that controls that heart, and we have the example of an artificial heart here. But what can we do to combat cardiovascular diseases, or to prevent them at least? The use of tobacco has to be avoided because tobacco is associated with a number of issues, including cardiovascular issues. The use of drugs, whether they are recreational or not, recreational drugs, actually, alcohol abuse. Bottom line, don't use drugs whenever you don't need them, right? And you have to completely avoid recreational drugs altogether. Okay, obesity and living a sedentary lifestyle, it's also another issue, right, that can cause cardiovascular diseases. And today, because of the type of work we do, we spend a lot of time sitting. We call this the sitting disease. That sitting disease is something we have to combat. That is the reason why you see some people in their office, they're going to have a desk that forces them to stand. So rather than sitting, we stand, right? A poor diet can lead to cardiovascular disease. Stress, yes, stress is a major etiological agent for cardiovascular diseases. And finally, but not least, poor dental hygiene. Poor dental hygiene has been shown to actually cause cardiovascular diseases. So this is where we are going to stop our discussion for this chapter. Thank you for your attention.